So, weekly stuff as usual. The commentary on the Syrian goddess, Thursday and Sunday. Please don't forget your online discussion, because it's the hybrid course, and that's where that's where part of the course is taking place. That's where part of your course grade is coming from. A significant part of your course grade is online discussion and the quizzes. So please make sure that you are doing the online stuff. Make sure that you've signed up for responses write up.
Sorry, where do we have to sign up for the response?
So you need to sign up for responses write up. One of the primary sources over the course of the semester, and that's on the course website. So if you go to the course website, one of the things along the top is it says sign up, and so you can click on that and choose one of the readings. You can choose any of the stuff that is assigned for 2 weeks, and the discussion of what the write-up is on the essays tab. So when it comes to actually doing it, then that information is in the syllabus as well. The proposal is due next week. So any questions about the proposal or the research essay for which the proposal is a harbinger of things to come? Basic idea is that you're going to be writing about a particular work from the ancient world and discussing what it tells us about religion, using 3 or 4 key examples from that work and adding additional research from either contemporary sources or scholarly discussion in order to make this a research paper that makes an argument about this work. And we're going to be doing this one step at a time. The first step is the proposal, in which you give a sense of the work that you are interested in writing about and what you think you might say about it. So if you haven't done so already, take a look at the list of possible works on the research essay page in the syllabus on the course website, and start thinking about your proposal. Any questions about what I'm looking for? There's a sample proposal on the proposal page, which links to on the announcement page. So, and I'm happy to discuss with you anything that you might be interested in writing about, anything that you're not sure about, anything that you want to touch base with me on. Is this going to work? How do we approach talking about a work like this? There's different kinds of works that are available to choose from. So the idea here is to spend a little time listening to someone from the ancient world talk about their culture and how their gods and their rituals and their myths help shape their sense of who they are. So one of the things that might help is thinking about it in those terms. Remember the 3 spheres of religion that we talked about a few weeks ago, where there's the divine world and the cultic, the ritual interaction between the mortal and the divine, and then there's the stories that are told about the gods and their relationship to the world. Those things are all interrelated, but they find their own way of expressing themselves in ancient literature. So think about that as you're thinking about the research essay. Any other questions, concerns, comments, irritations, allergies? Okay, let's talk a little bit more about last week's stuff. So the quiz, we talked a lot last week about Zoroastrianism and Zarathustra. So this, I think everybody got a sense of. Zarathustra is the prophet or philosopher or religious reformer who focused on the cult of Ahura Mazda and placed him in opposition to a balanced, equal God of darkness and falsehood. And it's very interesting because this comes up in this week's reading as well. At the very end of the reading about pollution and atonement, there's a discussion of the cosmic power of sin. How sin is raised to a force of its own in some religions, and Zoroastrianism is a good example of that. Distinction between magic and religion. We talked last week about how magic is essentially the cultic practices of others. And carries with it both the opprobrium of not lining up with what it is that you do and the appeal of the exotic. This is why magic is such a complex phenomenon, because there is an allure to things that break the rules as well as an offense. And that also ties in with what we're going to be talking about today. Some of the ways words and language played a role in. So this is talking about the different ways that words were used in order to invoke magical ideas, and this could be incantations. This could be narratives. This could be names. And again, this comes into play in today's reading. And the first civilized man. So, what did we conclude from the first civilized man from last week's reading? What do you think the first civilized man, the story of Yima, is telling us about the Iranians? What ideas came to us out of this reading? Yeah.
In a way, I think the concept of using magic, like with the ring, is to show how order and stability was able to take place in human civilization.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to say that that was the theme, or that was the idea, but then the incorporation of magic with the ring that, like he's saying, it's not Yilma, right? It's you, the first guy?
Yeah.
When he had the ring and the world was supposed to expand, so that's what I think the ring.
I wonder why that is. Why do you think that a ring is even involved in this? Why is there, instead of there being, some kind of direct connection, there's like this intervening object. Yeah.
Is it kind of like, I guess to bring some sort of, because like these gods are kind of like spirits, they don't kind of have physical form, so in order to, I guess, make it understandable, kind of like how God gave Moses a staff, instead of just having him just use his hand for it, they gave him like a tangible object that you could call as a conduit, kind of.
Right, the divine world is unseen. A talisman or, a magic wand or something like this is something that is tangible, is real, is touchable, and it's in our world. So it also gives us a greater sense of ownership and control. It's a referent for a transfer of agency and control over this magical power from the divine to the mortal. And so we get a very interesting sense of this in this story. Anything else jump out at us from the story of the first civilized man? What is this? Does it tell us something interesting about what's the what's this man's attitude toward the gods and toward Ahura Mazda? What's the relationship between him and Ahura Mazda? What are we seeing as the dynamic between them? Yeah.
They both kind of rely on each other in order for things to happen. Like for when I'm just gonna say the first guy, Yima, although he didn't follow through with what Ahura Mazda had said at first, he actually kind of did in a way, because although he wasn't like a prophet, he did still pass on those laws and rules to his people while demonstrating how to do that. So he still technically followed what Ahura Mazda did, but yeah. So,
but on his own terms.
Yeah, but on his own terms.
Right. So yeah, there's something very specific about the deliberate way in which he at first refuses to pass on the laws of Ahura Mazda, and then spreads Ahura Mazda's message, in his own way. So this is reflective of what we're saying about the Iranians in general and Zoroastrianism in particular, that it embodies a fundamental sense of free will. It is his choice to act according to his own wisdom, and it is the same is true for the rest of humanity. Most of the time, a story like this, you get the masses of humanity as a meaningless mob, a mindless collection of people. But in this story, the whole point is that all humans have agency, and all truth and falsehood in the world begins with choice, begins with free will. That's the essence of Iranian religion, and in particular, Zoroastrian dualism. So it's very interesting to contrast that, to compare and contrast, to see how different that is from the kind of paganism that is embraced by the Semitic peoples we're talking about today. So the first thing I want to do is just talk very briefly about geography. This territory here is called the Fertile Crescent. It is a little bit more farmable. It's is a little bit more sustainable in terms of population than the desert lands to the south and the mountainous lands to the east. So the Fertile Crescent throughout antiquity has a great deal of interaction and communication. And what happens over the course of the ancient world is that Semitic peoples migrate into the Fertile Crescent and develop city-state cultures based on the civilizations that are already present. So one of the defining characteristics about the Semitic peoples we're talking about is that they organize themselves into city-states. Originally, these are based on the Sumerians, and later the first peoples that move into Mesopotamia, we've already talked about, the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Today, we're expanding that a little to talk about Syria and Canaan, the other end of the Fertile Crescent. So some of what we're seeing from today's reading overlaps with the things that we said when we were talking about their cousins, the Semitic civilizations of Mesopotamia, the Assyrians and the Babylonians. So this territory here is for simplicity's sake, I refer to it as Canaan. Sometimes it's also called the Levant. Palestine technically is the southern end of it because Palestine originally derives from the settlers that arrived here at the end of the Bronze Age, the Philistines. Palestine, Philistine is the same word. So Palestine would be here, Israel and Judah. Sometimes this is called Syria, Palestine, or Syro, Canaan, or whatever. The thing to remember is that there is a great deal of movement around the Fertile Crescent. These people are connected to each other and trade with each other. There's a good deal of movement of goods and people and ideas, and so their stories are connected to each other. So, Semitic gods and goddesses. The reading for this week is it talks about the individual cities, and I'm gonna go through them very briefly in a minute. Ugarit and Ebla and all these names that are so familiar to us. But what can we say about what they have in common? What sense do we get from this reading of how these people saw their gods, of what these gods are like, how they relate to them? What kinds of commonalities were you seeing as you looked at each of these communities? Anything that started to seem familiar as you were looking at them? Or did it all just blur together and you're like, okay, I have to figure out, I have to find a place in my brain with a file drawer labeled Ugarit, which is certainly what I did. Any suggestions as to bottom lines that we can draw for the Syrians and the Canaanites, how they relate to their gods? You want me to just tell? So, one of the things that is characteristic of a city-state in general is that the city-states that come from the same culture share a core collection of gods. But each city-state has a patron deity. Right? So that's characteristic of city-states in general. What's striking to me about the Syrian and Canaanite city-states is that they have a shared core of gods. So, Ebla and Ugarit and the Phoenician cities and so forth tend to have, long lists of gods, 100, 200 gods that are present in various rituals and so forth. But the people, the gods at the top of this list tend to recur. So as you were reading this week's chapter, you would have seen Dagon, for example, over and over again. Because Dagon is, for the Syrians and the Canaanites, for all of these various various peoples, the Phoenicians and the Ugaritians, Ugaritanians, I don't know what the collective word is, the Arameans. For all these people, Dagon tends to be the father of the gods. And so that fathering implies fertility and therefore prosperity. But you also see Hadad, who is sometimes called Baal. And I mentioned this in the email. Baal becomes the catch-all term for Canaanite gods, especially from people hostile to them, like the Hebrews. Because, why is that? Did anybody catch what Baal actually signifies? This is mentioned in the reading at one particular point, but you might or might not have noticed it yet.
Wasn't it for like child sacrifice? Something like that?
Especially in the West, in Carthage and Malta, we see child sacrifice to Baal. And so Baal is, in some ways, harsher of the gods. He's the thunderer is not just his role in relation to the skies and natural forces, but also in terms of demeanor. But the word Baal means God. It's the Proto-Semitic word for God or deity, and so it's sometimes used to refer to to various gods, and sometimes used to refer specifically to one particular god who's also called Hadad. And the original usage would be Baal Hadad, the god Hadad, and the Baal became particularly astute. When you said Baal and didn't specify, you tended to be talking about the thunderer, talking about Hadad. There is this isn't just something that we see in this culture either. For the Greeks and the Romans, the chief god, Zeus or Jupiter, in linguistic terms has the same origin, but his names have the same origin, and it's related to the word for God in both languages. So this is the preeminent God, the God that stands out. Even in city-states where Hadad is not the primary God, he still tends to stand out. Likewise, we have El, the king of the gods, who is, and El just means Lord. And so this leads to some ambiguous usage where Lord can refer to a particular god that is in charge of a ceremony, but it also refers to this specific god, the king of the gods. You also have gods that are familiar from stories that have spread elsewhere. So, for example, Astarte is the goddess of war and hunting and love. And this should seem familiar because we've already encountered a goddess of love and war with a similar name, namely Ishtar, who is the Babylonian version of Astarte. Atargatis, goddess of fertility, is the subject of our reading this week. So we have God of healing, God of the sun, God of the moon, and so forth and so on. We have Malkart, king of the underworld. So all of the Syrian Canaanite peoples, each has their own culture, each has their own city-states. That what they have they're prominent in different periods. What they have in common is the same core of gods, but they have their own list of gods that are most important to them. So this is distinctive for the Syro-Canaanites, for the Semitic gods. Generally speaking, in city-state culture, so, the Sumerians, the Greeks, the Latins, those just have the same set of gods. All the Greek city-states have Zeus and Poseidon and Apollo and Aphrodite and Hera and so forth and so on. All of the Sumerian city-states have Enlil and Inanna and so forth. And, each of them will choose a patron deity out of those to be special to their city. But what they have in common is sharing the same pantheon. For the Semitic gods, each city selects the gods that are important to them out of the common core and often presents them in distinctive aspects so that the Dagon of Ebla is subtly different in behavior, in rituals, in expectations from the Dagon of Ugarit or of Sidon. And in fact, they might have their own version of the name. This is particularly true for Hadad because Hadad is often called Baal dash something that is characteristic of a particular city-state. So so each the origin, the core concept of that god of where he or she came from and the role that they play in the physical universe has the same common core, but the face and the ideology and the rituals are idiosyncratic, are personalized for each city, so that each city has its own version of the shared pantheon, the shared religion, and its own subset of the gods that's important to them. Yeah?
Just a quick question. So, when the Semitic peoples come into Mesopotamia to develop those city-states, right? Is this at the same time the Babylonians and the Syrians are coming in, or are they?
Yeah, so what happens is that, so we have the story of the Bronze Age, which ends around 1100 BCE. So the Bronze Age starts with Sumer already in place at the beginning. Sumer is like the indigenous city-state civilization at the southern end of Mesopotamia. And then into this comes the Akkadians and the Babylonians and the Assyrians. By the way, don't mix up Assyria with Syria. Right? If we look at crap. Yes, if we look at crap, Assyria is the northern end of Mesopotamia. And Syria is this land on the southern, southwest side of this is the Euphrates River. So north of the Euphrates is Assyria, named after a city called Ashur, which is here on the Tigris. So Assyria you should think of as the land of Ashur, the city of Ashur. And then Syria is this land to the south of it. Anyway, so the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians come in. They see the Sumerian city-states and emulate them and build city-states of their own and surpass the accomplishments of the Sumerians and eventually swallow them up. And then, along with this, we start to see the rise of Syrian city-states like Ebla and Ugrit that we're talking about this week. And then the Bronze Age collapses. So the empires of the Bronze Age that exist, that dominate the Eastern Mediterranean during this period. So these are the Mycenaean Greeks, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, and the Hittites. All people that we have talked about or will talk about. The Bronze Age empires build up to a state of frenetic power that is unbalanced. It's too intense for reasons that I would talk about in another class. And it all comes to a head with a catastrophic failure of all of the Bronze Age empires. And the Bronze Age peoples are, all of their cities and their civilizations collapse in the Eastern Mediterranean. And then we see the dawn of a new era, the Iron Age. And this is where we see the rise of the Phoenicians and Israel and other peoples that couldn't emerge as powerful because the Bronze Age empires were too busy rivaling with fighting with each other. Did that answer your question? Okay. That took me in a different direction, but I needed to talk about it anyway. So so each has its own set of the core gods of the Syrio-Palestine peoples, and so each city has a patron deity. The role of the patron deity becomes ruler over that city's version of the pantheon of the gods. And often what we'll see is that that ruler will be two gods, a god and a goddess, acting jointly together. This is not too unusual. A lot of patron deities have consorts, but not necessarily. Athens, the patron deity, is Athena. Athena doesn't have a husband. Athena is the sole force. Inanna Ishtar doesn't operate with a consort. When she's a patron deity of a Sumerian city, she acts alone. But so Astarte, might be paired with Melkart, for example, to provide a duality of two different kinds of force that helps protect and enrich the city. A divine couple jointly protecting the city-state. So we have myths and rituals, right? We have the divine world, we have the rituals that connect them, and we have the stories that we tell, the three spheres. So the myths and the rituals don't necessarily agree, but the sense that we get from the mythology is, of course, the stories that are told tell us about the relationships between the gods. They tend to talk about this pantheon of a particular city-state as being a collective, as being a community, as acting in assembly in some way, so that divine world that they belong to is a unified whole. The intent of mythology seems to be about reinforcing mortality as being a characteristic that separates humans from gods. And so the gods are placed in a superior position because they possess immortality. In some cultures, this is interesting because in some cultures, mortality is emphasized as a benefit. The fact that we all die, the Sumerians see that as beneficial because that drives people to accomplish before death comes. The emphasis in Syro-Canaanite religion seems to be more on reinforcing the idea that the gods are a superior form of life. The fact that the gods are very concerned about childbearing carries over the necessity of childbearing for mortals as well. So, the mythology is serving as a model for, the importance of marriage, the importance of childbearing. And fundamentally, we get the sense that the world of the gods is near. It is close. It is present, but it is beyond a screen. The nature of the gods is to be separate from us and unseen. And so that brings about questions of communication. And communication is partly through ritual. There's an emphasis on sacrifice as a means of ensuring the satisfaction of the gods, that humans are pure and committed. And so, and also that the sacrifice is necessary. That it's not just a symbolic. It's described as being sustenance for the gods. Now you can take this in a literal sense and say that it's sustenance in the sense that so you're sacrificing animals, and you're also providing beverage and oil and so forth. This is a literal sustenance that you are providing for these unseen gods. But there's also a subtext to this, that the sacrifice itself, that the act of giving up is, in and of itself, the act is something that feeds the gods, that reinforces their ability and willingness to act on behalf of the mortals that are engaging in this. the act of sacrifice is metaphorical, but it's also a literal means of strengthening the gods. The gods would not be able to. The gods would not be as strong, not in their natural force, but in their ability to interact with the mortal world. What we're doing through sacrifice is strengthening their ability to act upon our world. So there are festivals that are associated with various time periods. Festivals associated with agricultural events, festivals associated with the new moon and the full moon. The way that that precious things are vowed to the gods in order to get their attention, and this includes elaborate and ornate temples and statues and so forth and so on, things that are of worth to humans being given to the gods as indication of the nature of wealth being a outcome of what the gods have done for us, and as a different form of sacrifice. So in this case, the gods are not eating gold, but they're eating the gift, which allows them to act on our behalf. As you mentioned, there are some reports that the kinds of sacrifice that are engaged in goes to the extreme of child sacrifice. I would be cautious in how you imagine this, because we don't know a lot of the details involved or how common it is. It seems to come up only in the westernmost of Phoenician colonies and this kind of thing, and the stories are anecdotal, and it's not necessarily clear, whose child is involved. But whether metaphorical or actual events, this is demonstrative of the extreme form of sacrifice, giving up what is precious to you in order to demonstrate your commitment to the God and your worthiness, and to ensure the God's ability to grant what the community needs. Yes.
Were the Hebrews at this time following the Semitic faith?
Yeah. So.
So with the Old Testament, when God told someone to sacrifice his son, is that referencing these old rituals from the past?
Right, and the way that happens in the Old Testament is a subversion of this. So, if you don't know the story, in the Old Testament, in Genesis, we see Abraham, who's the father of monotheistic Judaism, is ordered to sacrifice his son Isaac. And at the last minute, as Abraham is raising the knife, Yahweh pulls him back and says, I do not require this of you. It is enough that you are willing to do it. And then Abraham sacrifices a sheep instead. And so that story is a reference to the fact that Canaanites and Phoenicians, were understood by the Hebrews to practice this in moments of extremity. An extreme sacrifice would come in a moment of extreme need, like the prospect of a city being destroyed by an enemy force or something like that. And so the story was told to distinguish monotheistic Judaism from its roots in this shared Semitic religion. And so from behind this veil, the gods are active in speaking to us, and they in speaking to these peoples, and they do so through dreams, through portents, and through prophecy. What's the difference between a seer and a prophet, do you think? I know the book didn't really talk about this, but yeah.
Prophets are pull things from deities, and seers are kind of like magical, right? Like they kind of just, they can do it themselves.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, a seer is using either ritual or magic to be able to gain knowledge from some other place or some other source. And so, yeah, a seer would be somebody who is practicing this art of gaining knowledge, and is doing it, to some extent through his own agency. A prophet is a God speaking through a mortal. And both of these are important to these Semitic religions. Both of these are seen as. We were talking last week about what makes a magician, right? A magician is somebody with experience and practical knowledge in the manipulation of supernatural forces, a practitioner, a specialist. And so a seer especially is seen as somebody who has these magical abilities. A prophet might have abilities or experience, or might simply be a mouthpiece. But what we see in these religions, in these places, is that the prophet tends to have a role of castigation, of announcing the displeasure of the gods. I'll come back to that in a minute. What about death and afterlife? Did we get any sense of how the death and afterlife is thought about in these cultures, in these religions? Yeah.
Did they value skulls? Were these people that valued skulls a lot?
I wouldn't say necessarily specifically. The human remains are seen as of particular importance.
I thought I read that they kept the skulls of people who passed away or something like that.
They probably do. Not necessarily. I mean, that's definitely the kind of thing that could be used in specialized rituals and maybe in sort of sorcery kinds of things as well. But the thing that's characteristic collectively is just a sense that, first of all, we see the role of the dead as being remembered as part of the collective story, and because the kings are so important, the deceased kings become a part of mythology. Not necessarily seen as gods in their own right, but the deceased kings have rituals that are designed to ensure the pleasure of dead royalty beyond the grave. Most important, though, is rituals of burial must be respected. The violation of the dead is forbidden because it disturbs the ability of the dead to rest. One of the side effects of this is that the dead are talked about as shades, and so they're present beyond the veil, but not active like the gods are. And so there isn't a sense that the afterlife is a place where you can accomplish things. Dead human beings become part of this world of shades that is beyond the veil, in this unseen world where the gods are. But they're not there to do things. They're just there to be protected and to be remembered as part of the story of the community. So what's the relationship then between gods and mortals for these peoples? How can we summarize the way that these people think of themselves in relation to the gods? If we were to sort of encapsulate it in a few words. One thing that we can say is that I mentioned before the importance of the kings. The gods are active in ensuring the appointment and legitimacy of kings. And so the presence of the gods and the active role of the gods is made felt partly through natural events like dreams and portents, partly through prophecy, through prophets speaking and talking about what the gods will, and partly through the actions of kings that they have ensured the enthronement of and are approved of by them. The return for being an approved and divinely recognized king is that you're expected to act on the God's behalf. And this would likely be, in particular, the preeminent God pair of the city that you are living in. In other words, the king of a particular city would be expected to act on behalf of the patron god and goddess of that city, and that they would be forming a special relationship. Yeah.
This is dreams or what?
Or portents.
Oh.
So portents would be natural events that show the hand of God, whether it's two-headed calves or a lightning strike upon a temple or something like that. And the upshot of this, therefore, is that the gods expected the humans to act as their servants. The relationship between the mortal and the divine for the Syro-Canaanites, and we see this also in Syria and Babylon too. Marduk in Babylon. Melkor is from Doctor Who. Marduk in Babylon expects the same servitude from the Babylonians and from the Babylonian kingdom. So this is something that's characteristic of Semitic peoples in general. And so, there's a relationship of mutual obligation where the mortals get blessing in return for service. And when that is not forthcoming, when when mortals do not, act in their roles, or the kings don't do as they're told and act on behalf of the gods, the result is wrath and therefore potentially catastrophe. Because one characteristic of gods in general in the ancient world is that they don't tend to punish only the individual that angers them. Gods tend to punish those around the person that angered them. All right, so the specific city-states. So here we are in the Bronze Age. This is during the period where Assyria and the Hittites and the Egyptians are rising in rivalry and power, and we see in between them the flourishing of a couple of Syrian cities. Ebla, we get evidence of the core of the Semitic gods. We see evidence of gates being named after Dagon and Hadad and so forth. We see the wealth of the city being expressed in the wealth that is present in the temples. The more wealthy these cities are, the more they devote that wealth to their gods, and particularly their patron god and goddess. Ebla is destroyed at the end of the Bronze Age, like everyone else. In fact, it's destroyed before that because all three of these Bronze Age powers keep marching up and down the eastern shores of the Mediterranean in constant rivalry and warfare with each other, and Ebla ends up getting seized and taken by the Hittites before the Bronze Age even comes to its climax. We have Ugarit at the very height of the Bronze Age, one of the great lost cities of the ancient world. This is one of those places where you would love to visit what Ugarit looked like in the 13th century, because it is a magnificently successful trading city that shows all of its wealth and splendor in its cities, its architecture, its streets, its buildings, its temples, its statues of the gods. It gives us a set of myths about the rise of its particular dominant god, Baal Hadad. So we get this is a good example of how the cities tend to show the dominance of particular gods in their own set of pantheons, their own set of stories. Sacrifice for atonement for the community is also in evidence in Ugarit. This Ugarit outlasts to the very end of the Bronze Age and comes crashing down with the invasions of the Sea Peoples. And we get one more great Syrian city-state in Emar. Here we see, somewhat unusually, that the kings are comparatively weak and the priests are able to operate their religion independently. Another thing that comes up in Emar that is interesting is it talks about processions in which the gods are taken at the head of the procession out of the city. So you have a procession from a holy place within the city to another holy place outside of the city. And this is suggestive of something that is characteristic in general of these Syro-Canaanite religions, which is that the statues of the gods, usually they're not huge. They would be something like this, right? The statues of the gods are thought of as being imbued with a connection to those gods, and that the gods can take hold of, can embody themselves within these statues for the purposes of religious rituals and processions. So when you have a ritual in the presence of one of these statues, the god will invest him or herself in that statue, be present in the stone or terracotta or marble or whatever. The god will be within and imbue that statue. And in these processions, the god would then be brought with the people at the head of the population to the destination of the pilgrimage. This is, we can call this idolatry, right? And this is one of the things that the Hebrews later reject, because we can talk about that when we talk more about Judaism. But the upshot of idolatry. What's going to happen if you practice idolatry? Why would this be something that the Jews would end up wanting to reject? What would be the downside for a people if they practice idolatry long enough? Then the idols themselves are thought of as being the gods. And the people lose sight of the true nature of the divine and see only a statue and worship the statue. And this is something that the God of the Jews rejects, insists on being worshipped for himself. So when the Bronze Age collapses, the empires of the Bronze Age are gone. They've been their economies have been destroyed, and their people have fled to the countryside, and there are no longer armies marching up and down Canaan. And the Canaanites, and in particular the Phoenicians, which is one group of the Canaanites, is free to build their own trading power. And so we see the rise of several different Phoenician city-states, each with their own god and goddess, and each with their own pantheon, their own version of the core set of gods and their own stories about them. And these are spread through. So, we still see some of the same, gods. Here's Baalat, goddess, just means goddess, but Baalat refers in particular to the goddess Atargatis, who, like I said, we'll be reading about in this week's reading. The Phoenicians have this selection of gods and goddesses that are common to all the Syro-Canaanite peoples. But each city chooses the ones that are important to them and customizes them. Creates their own version of the pantheon, their own set of stories, and chooses two of them to be dominant in that city. And the Phoenicians spread throughout the Mediterranean, planting colonies and trading posts, some of which become important cities of their own, in particular Carthage, but also Tangier. And they perpetuate the Phoenician religions and spread stories, so that Astarte, for example, the Canaanite version of Ishtar, becomes famous in stories of other peoples through contact with Phoenician traders. This is also how the phonetic alphabet spreads. The Phoenicians developed the first phonetic alphabet, and it's passed all around the Mediterranean through their trading contacts and their creation colonies. The Aramaeans settled in this territory, and instead of focusing on creating power for their own cities, they become present in a lot of other cities. And so the Aramaeans spread outward from their homeland, engaged in trade by land. The Phoenicians trade by sea. The Aramaeans trade by land. And so as a result, their language becomes common throughout the Fertile Crescent, and Aramaic becomes a sort of common tongue to the point that by the time we get to the New Testament times, people in Nazareth and Galilee, like Jesus, are speaking in Aramaic, not because they're from the Aramaic ethnicity, but because Aramaeans are so common that their language becomes a common tongue. One of the things I found interesting about the Aramaeans is the way that they use curses is in the enforcement of order, and in particular the enforcement of treaties. The Iranians had a god prior to Zoroastrianism. The Iranians had a god for this too. So this might suggest some contact between the Aramaeans and the Iranians, shared emphasis on the divine role in ensuring the adherence to treaties. And then finally, we have the return of the Hebrews to this part of the world. Now, as we know, the Hebrews develop a monotheistic religion which rejects paganism, pantheons, and all of this in favor of one special God. But we can see the continuation of some of the things that we've been talking about in Judaism. The way that Judaism emphasizes the role of priests and temples, of religious institutions, and particularly of prophets in the way that they emphasize the active participation of God in human affairs from beyond the veil through portents, dreams, and prophets. Yahweh is active and engaged in shaping human affairs, and this is a legacy of Hadad and El and Dagon and Astarte and all these other Syro-Canaanite gods who are actively seeking to interact and impress their desires upon the people through the agency of rulers and dreams and portents. In fact, Yahweh is identified with the Syro-Canaanite god El, which, as I said before, just means Lord. So when the Hebrews acquire a single divinity, they sometimes refer to him as Lord, especially to avoid saying the God's name. So, in other words, Judaism does not spring out of nowhere, and it is not a wholesale rejection of the pagan roots that they came from. Judaism is built upon the foundation of the Syro-Canaanite religion, and their ideas about the relationship between mortals and the divine with their refinement, just as Zarathustra refined their Iranian religion to say that there are two gods in opposition to each other and in balance with each other. Abraham and his successors redefine the Semitic religion to say all of this is still the basic truth, except only one of these gods is worthy of our devotion. And in return for that, we will get the blessing. There's still that same sense of mutual obligation. The difference is in the fact that a monotheistic God is bound to a people instead of to the land. These are still pagan gods that belong to the land that they come from. Yahweh frees himself from the land and is bound to the people. And this creates a distinctive idea for monotheism. Okay. And so, as you read about the Syrian goddess and comment upon it, think about it in these terms. Think about it, the reading about Atargatis and the city of the goddess in terms of these ideas, in terms of the active nature of the gods behind the veil, in terms of the way that each city-state has its own perception and its own stories of the gods, in terms of the importance of kings and prophets and dreams and portents as a means of agency, and the importance of sacrifice and vowing of gifts to gods as demonstration of worthiness and value. All right, a little bit about pollution in the remaining 5 minutes. I still need to work on my pacing. So, boundaries of human behavior. The section on sin and pollution is in terms of, human beings have these ideas of right and wrong. Why is religion concerned with whether humans behave properly? Whether humans act within the boundaries of acceptable behavior? Why is this a matter for religion? Why should the gods care about whether somebody is doing wrong or right? Why do you think? Yeah.
Because there will be chaos.
Okay, so partly there's a sense that the gods have a vested interest in order for humanity. Yes.
I feel like the gods care about human behavior because it's the gods' job to take care of the humans and to provide for them, provide land, provide water, life itself. So if they're going against the moral behavior, then they're just betraying everything that God offers them.
Right. So this betraying of what the gods offer to them. This is a denial of what the gods do to ensure that humans have what is necessary. And there's also an expectation that in order to stand before the gods and to ask things of the gods, you need to be worthy of doing so. You need to be able to show that you are pure. And so, if you have debased yourself, then this is an insult to the gods. This is a defiance of what the gods expect from humans, because the gods expect humans to treat them with respect in order for the humans to be treated with respect. And so what we end up with is the combination of ritual, story, and human law that shape morality. Sometimes there's also religious law, the the strictures of how people should behave in terms of religion become codified and have their own punishments. Especially in places where priests have political power, like in Rome, as we'll see at the end of the semester. There's two general categories of sin. One is if you polluted yourself, and one is if you have offended the gods. So, what do you need to do to pollute yourself? You need to come into contact with something that is unclean, that renders you unclean. This is various things for various cultures, but this can include, blood, rotting flesh. Also, birth, death, and sex can render you unclean. The point here is that this is unavoidable for most people. And there are some circumstances where it's expected of you to become unclean for procreative sex, or because it's religiously necessary to bury bodies. The consequences of being unclean, remember the slides are up on the website, so you can come back to this. Consequences of unclean, unable to participate in rituals, the fact that it affects the rest of the community and the land. And so you have the possibility of becoming unclean. Sacrilege, the insult to the gods, is essentially the pollution of something that the gods care about. And so this can be their temple, or their priests or their family. It can be their name. The results can be catastrophic. And one of the key points here is that the effect of this, the other reason why religion becomes mixed up with human morality, is that is what we talked about a few weeks ago, our old friend theologization. That human suffering is seen as demonstration of divine wrath, and therefore of sin. And so you must undergo cleansing. If you're an individual, you must undergo propitiation to please the gods. If the gods are offended as a community, the community must constantly be in this situation where they are ensuring that they are atoning for their collective sins, because the gods have been described as being active in shaping human history and in bringing about suffering in response to the failings of peoples. And the context being things that have created threats to political rule suddenly become collective sin. Things that the gods respond to with plague and famine and drought and military defeat. And so this is a theme that will be recurring as we continue to talk about this through the semester. I will leave you there. Sorry for keeping you a little late. Make sure to make your comments on the Syrian goddess. Come to me with any questions about the proposal, and we'll see you next week.